alien Cowboy lived alone for years, until 10 alien natives appeared, asking for shelter on his land. The silence that had been Marcus Steele's only companion for 17 years was shattered at 4:23 on a Tuesday morning by the sound of footsteps that moved with a rhythm no terrestrial creature had ever possessed. From his position on the porch of his isolated Wyoming ranch house, Marcus watched 10 figures emerge from the pre-dawn mist like ghosts materializing from another dimension, their movements so perfectly synchronized that they seemed to share a single consciousness distributed across multiple bodies. Each figure stood nearly 7 feet tall, their forms humanoid but clearly evolved under gravitational and atmospheric conditions, different from Earth's. Their skin held the deep bronze coloration of beings whose ancestors had lived beneath the light of a different sun, while their eyes reflected the star-filled darkness with an inner luminescence that spoke of enhanced vision, adapted for worlds with longer nights than days. What made Marcus's alien-enhanced senses flood with recognition and alarm was not just their obvious non-human nature, but the electromagnetic signatures that identified them as refugees from the Kepler system, survivors of a civilization that his own people had written off as extinct after the Stellar War that had consumed 3 inhabited worlds and left entire star systems uninhabitable for millennia to come. Marcus himself had been living in self-imposed exile on Earth for nearly 2 decades, fleeing memories of battles fought across multiple galaxies and seeking peace in the vast emptiness of the American frontier. His ranch, located in the most remote corner of the Wyoming territory, where no human settlement existed within 300 miles, had provided him with the isolation his war-torn psyche required, while serving as a refuge from the complex politics of galactic civilization. The Kepler refugees approached his porch with the cautious dignity of beings who had learned that survival often depended on reading the intentions of strangers quickly and accurately. Their leader, a female whose bearing suggested both authority and the kind of weariness that came from years of desperate wandering, stepped forward with the formal courtesy that characterized diplomatic contact between advanced civilizations. "Marcus Steele of the Andorian Defense Corps," she said, her words carrying harmonics that identified her as educated in the linguistic protocols used for interspecies communication. "I am Commander Zara Nightwind of the Kepler Liberation Fleet, though that fleet now consists of only these 10 souls who stand before you. We have traveled far to reach this place, guided by intelligence that suggested we might find sanctuary with one who understands the burden of exile." The formal introduction hit Marcus with the force of a plasma cannon to his carefully maintained emotional barriers. For 17 years, he had been Marcus Steele, a solitary rancher whose past was a carefully constructed fiction designed to explain his unusual knowledge and capabilities to any humans who might encounter him. The discovery that his true identity was known to survivors of a conflict he had tried to forget forced him to confront the reality that even in the most remote corners of the galaxy, the past had a way of finding those who tried to escape it. "Commander Nightwind," Marcus replied, using the respectful forms of address that military protocol required when acknowledging a fellow officer, regardless of their current circumstances. "I am indeed who you believe me to be, though I had hoped that identity was buried deep enough to remain undisturbed. How did you find me? And what brings survivors of Kepler Prime to seek shelter on a world that most of the galaxy considers to be inhabited only by primitive humans?" Zara's response revealed both the sophistication of their intelligence gathering and the desperate circumstances that had driven them to risk contact with someone whose location had been classified at the highest levels of galactic security. The Kepler survivors had been wandering between worlds for over a decade, seeking a place where they could establish a new settlement without attracting the attention of the various factions that continued to hunt refugees from their destroyed civilization. Earth had been identified as a possibility because of its remote location and primitive human population, but also because intelligence networks had suggested that certain individuals with the knowledge and capability to provide protection might already be present on the planet. Marcus's ranch had been located through analysis of electromagnetic signatures and energy consumption patterns that indicated the presence of advanced technology in an area where none should have existed. "We do not come as conquerors or colonizers," Zara explained, her voice carrying the exhaustion of beings who had spent too many years explaining their peaceful intentions to suspicious audiences. "We seek only a place where we can rebuild our lives without fearing attack from those who see our survival as a threat to their own interests." Your reputation suggests that you might understand the desire to find peace after too many years of war. The request for shelter on his land represented everything that Marcus had been trying to avoid since establishing his refuge in the Wyoming wilderness. Taking in refugees would inevitably lead to complications with human authorities, exposure of his true nature, and potential involvement in conflicts that he had sworn to leave behind. His carefully constructed isolation would be shattered, and the peace he had found in solitude would be lost forever. But looking at the 10 Kepler survivors, Marcus saw reflections of his own experiences with loss, displacement, and the desperate search for a place where the horrors of war could be forgotten if not forgiven. These were beings who had lost everything they had once called home, and who now faced the prospect of endless wandering, unless someone was willing to take the risk of offering them sanctuary. The decision that Marcus made in that moment would transform not only his own life, but the entire future of both Earth's development and galactic refugee policy. "Commander Nightwind," he said, stepping down from his porch and extending his hand in the universal gesture of welcome. "You and your people are welcome to shelter on my land for as long as you need it. We can discuss the practical arrangements after you've had time to rest and recover from your journey." What followed was perhaps the most unusual homecoming in the history of the American frontier, as 10 refugees from a destroyed star system began the process of establishing a new settlement in the Wyoming wilderness, under the protection of a war veteran who had been seeking his own form of refuge on the same planet. The practical challenges of integrating Kepler survivors into Earth's ecosystem while maintaining security from both human observation and potential alien threats required careful planning and innovative solutions. The refugees possessed advanced technology that could make their settlement self-sufficient, but using it openly would create electromagnetic signatures that might attract unwanted attention from galactic intelligence services. Marcus's ranch had been designed to appear completely normal to human observation, while actually incorporating advanced systems that provided security, communication, and resource management capabilities far beyond anything frontier technology could achieve. The expansion required to accommodate 10 additional inhabitants would need to maintain the same careful balance between functionality and camouflage. But as the weeks passed and the Kepler survivors began adapting to their new environment, Marcus discovered that their presence brought unexpected benefits that compensated for the complications of maintaining their cover. The refugees possessed knowledge and skills that complemented his own capabilities, creating possibilities for development that he had never considered during his years of solitary operation. Commander Nightwind proved particularly valuable as both a strategic advisor and a connection to galactic intelligence networks that Marcus had been cut off from since establishing his Earth-based refuge. Her reports about conditions throughout the galaxy provided context for understanding threats and opportunities that could affect Earth's future development, while her military experience offered insights into defensive strategies that could protect their settlement from various potential dangers. The other survivors each brought specialized knowledge that contributed to their growing community. Their biotechnician could enhance local agriculture using techniques that appeared completely natural, while dramatically improving yields and resistance to environmental stress. Their communications specialist could establish secure networks that provided early warning of approaching threats while maintaining perfect security from human or hostile alien detection. Most importantly, their presence transformed Marcus's psychological isolation in ways that he had not realized he needed. The camaraderie of beings who understood the costs of war and the challenges of exile provided him with the first genuine companionship he had experienced since fleeing the conflicts that had driven him to Earth. The first major test of their new community came when human territorial authorities began investigating reports of unusual activity in the region. Frontier life attracted individuals who were observant about changes in their environment, and the electromagnetic signatures associated with their expanded operations had begun attracting attention from sources that could potentially threaten their security. The solution required careful coordination between advanced alien technology and frontier deception techniques. The Kepler survivors proved remarkably adaptable to human customs and behavior patterns, allowing them to present themselves as an extended family of settlers who had recently arrived from California seeking ranch land in the territory's remote regions. Marcus's established reputation as a successful but reclusive rancher provided cover for the group's presence, while his knowledge of local conditions and human psychology guided their interactions with territorial officials. The combination of alien intelligence and frontier experience created a deception so complete that even experienced investigators found no evidence of anything unusual about the new settlement. But their greatest challenge came not from human authorities, but from the arrival of a Kepler hunting party that had been tracking the refugees across multiple star systems. The hunters represented one of the factions that viewed any survivors of the Kepler civilization as potential threats to the new order that had emerged from the Stellar War's conclusion. The confrontation that developed tested both Marcus's military capabilities and the refugees' commitment to their new peaceful existence. The hunting party arrived expecting to find defenseless survivors hiding on a primitive world, but instead encountered a coordinated defense that demonstrated the effectiveness of combining Kepler technology with Andorian military doctrine and Earth-based tactical advantages. The battle was brief but decisive, with the hunting party's superior numbers and advanced weapons neutralized by defenders who knew the terrain, possessed perfect intelligence about their opponent's capabilities, and fought with the desperation of beings protecting their last chance at peace and security. The victory established the Wyoming settlement as a successful example of refugee integration and defensive cooperation, but it also attracted attention from galactic authorities who had to reassess their policies regarding both Earth's strategic importance and the handling of war refugees throughout the galaxy. Marcus found himself serving not just as a protector of 10 Kepler survivors, but as an advocate for refugee rights and a coordinator of Earth-based sanctuary operations that would eventually encompass thousands of beings from dozens of war-torn civilizations. His ranch became the unofficial headquarters for what would develop into the galaxy's most successful refugee resettlement program. The isolation that had been his refuge for 17 years was replaced by purpose and community that provided far greater satisfaction than solitude had ever offered. The aliens who had appeared asking for shelter had given him the opportunity to transform his own exile into service that made a difference for beings throughout the galaxy who needed protection and hope. Commander Nightwind, who had arrived as a desperate refugee, became his partner in both the practical operations of their growing community and the strategic planning that would be required to address the larger refugee crisis affecting multiple star systems. Her combination of military expertise and compassionate leadership proved invaluable for managing the complex challenges of integrating survivors from different civilizations while maintaining security and secrecy. The Kepler survivors, who had seemed like complications to his peaceful isolation, proved to be the foundation for achievements that gave meaning to his years of frontier exile. Their knowledge, skills, and perspectives contributed to innovations in agriculture, technology, and social organization that benefited not just their own community, but the broader development of refugee settlement throughout the galaxy. Years later, as Marcus stood on the porch where he had first encountered the 10 figures emerging from the morning mist, he was no longer alone but surrounded by a thriving community that had grown to include hundreds of beings from dozens of different worlds. The ranch that had been his retreat from galactic civilization had become one of the most important centers for interspecies cooperation and refugee assistance in known space. The silence that had been his companion for so many years had been replaced by the sounds of children playing, adults working, and families building new lives from the wreckage of old ones. The loneliness that had driven him to seek isolation on a distant world had been healed by the discovery that true peace came not from avoiding others, but from serving purposes larger than individual comfort or security. The alien cowboy who had lived alone for years had learned that the greatest shelter he could provide was not just physical protection, but the opportunity for others to rebuild their lives with dignity, security, and hope for the future. The 10 alien natives who had appeared asking for shelter had brought him not complications but the chance to transform his exile into service that would be remembered and celebrated throughout the galaxy for generations to come. The request for shelter that had seemed like an unwelcome interruption to his solitary peace had actually been the beginning of his most important contribution to galactic civilization, proving that sometimes the most significant discoveries came disguised as inconvenient obligations, and that the greatest adventures began when someone in need appeared at the door, asking for help from those who had the courage and wisdom to say yes.